Louisville commits Aaron Williams and Jamari Johnson were recently named to the Adidas All-American Bowl. We'll talk about that and more on this episode of the show. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Happy Memorial Day. As always, I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinal Sports Zone and also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time, as always, to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. It was announced over the weekend that two Louisville commits, both Aaron Williams and Jamari Johnson, were named to the Adidas All-American Bowl. They accepted invitations to the bowl. Both will be on the West team. But the remainder of the show will be about some cards in the NFL. We'll discuss why Fitzpatrick and Tutu Atwell both are primed for solid seasons in year two of their respective NFL careers. But we'll start out talking about the two 2023 commits, Aaron Williams and Jamari Johnson, have accepted invites to the Adidas All-American Bowl. For those who are not aware of who that is, or what that is, I should say, the Adidas All-American Bowl, I believe, took the place of the U.S. Army Navy, or I think it's the U.S. Army All-American Bowl or whatever it was called. I apologize for my ignorance in that regard. But really, this shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise. Aaron Williams especially, I think that ranked in the top 150, I think number 126 overall recruiting according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. I think that he's one of the best cornerbacks in the nation, especially coming from California. It seems like that ranking is legit. Nothing really surprising there for the next level. I do see him as a possible number one true lockdown corner, kind of like Jair Alexander, kind of like Kittrell Clark, so on and so forth. I love his size, being 6'2", 185 pounds. I think that the size really is going to do him well for guarding opposing receivers, especially number one receivers, to where, that are a little bigger, a little stronger and faster. I love his ability to read opposing quarterbacks' eyes and their movements, and being able to jump passing lanes, do a great job of contesting 50-50 balls. I think his athleticism is something that needs to be addressed as well. I just think that this one is kind of what you would expect. This is sort of one of those instances to where it'll be interesting to see if any other players accept invitations in the Flyville 23 class. But I'm not necessarily surprised at all that Aaron Williams is on that list. Jamari Johnson, the athlete that is going to Louisville as a tight end, is on that list, ranked in I believe it's the top 650. I could be wrong, but I believe he's ranked inside of the top 600. Let me just look that up real quick. I apologize. Jamari Johnson. I had it all written out, but okay. So Jamari Johnson ranked the 604th best player in the class according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, the 54th best athlete, the 40th best recruit in the state of California. 6'5", 250 pounds. This is an instance to where I think that it really it confirms, the scouting department in the recruiting realm for Louisville, in saying that I think that sometimes it's harder for guys that play quarterback or have played quarterback to kind of step into a receiver role, like a receiver or tight end. But it seems like Jamari Johnson is going to be a player that recruiting services look at and really do believe in the transition there. For those who don't know, he plays kind of as a wildcat quarterback in a sense, really taking the ball in sort of a Dominique Brown role. If you remember, coming to Louisville as sort of a quarterback hybrid, got converted into being a running back, and kind of took things in the wildcat situations, or wild card, if you will. A little bit of a different phrasing. But I think ultimately, This really has to make you feel good if you're a Louisville fan, just having guys that are in this game. Obviously, you would want to have more considering the 4 stars that you have recruited, and you want to see Pierce Clarkson, in that, role as well. But I do think that some of these guys are going to get into, situations to where they get invitations to other bowl games. So excited to look at it that way. But ultimately, I mean, there's no denying the overall excitement here. Having 2 recruits, and one of them being a top 610 player, it does make you wonder how much farther up are we going to see Jamari Johnson's stock rise. I think that this is a player that could rise into, if he gets directly listed as a tight end, which I'm not sure he does, could be rated as one of the best tight ends in the class. If he stays as an athlete, according to some recruiting services, I could definitely see him rising into that low 4-star, high 3-star range with a good high school season. But ultimately, I wanted to discuss this phenomenon of the guys being accepting invites into these roles, because hey, let's call a spade here. There's no there's no drawbacks to this. Number one, it's good exposure. You get some Louisville commits that are able to go to this bowl game and possibly be able to recruit some other targets that the university is going after. But ultimately, extremely excited for Aaron, who I think is going to be one of the best cornerbacks in the ACC when his career's all said and done. One of the the best cornerbacks in his last season. We'll see how much playing time he will get in year one, especially for a cornerback room that has a ton of uncertainty. Who knows? Who knows exactly what we're going to see from Aaron Williams in year one. Jamari Johnson, on the other hand, Marshawn Ford is likely gone at the end of this season. Then you insert a player like Jamari Johnson, who brings a lot of the same qualities as Marshawn Ford. I keep coming back to this explanation that he's too quick to be guarded by opposing linebackers, but he's too big to be guarded by opposing defensive backs. And I think that that's the same kind of vibes that I'm getting from Jamari Johnson, a player at 6'5" that moves extremely well, underrated route runner, has solid hands. It's exactly what you want if you are Scott Satterfield, Josh Stepp and company, Lance Taylor, etc. Being able to get a big tight end with versatile playmaking abilities, solid athleticism, and underrated speed. It's something to take a look at. So I definitely think that both Aaron Williams and Jamari Johnson could see immediate playing time as early as their first year at Louisville. But overall, in terms of this invitation, we're in the realm to where Louisville over the past handful of seasons hasn't necessarily had a lot of Army All-American bowl players, Adidas All-American, whatever you want to call it. So getting 2 players that are added on to the West roster is absolutely huge. I cannot state that fact enough. So very, very excited for both of them. Congratulations to Aaron Williams. Congratulations are also in order to Jamari Johnson, who are going to make this university proud. Excited to see how much they are able to grow and how much their stock is going to rise heading into next recruiting cycle's signing day. But that's all of the recruiting talk that I want to dedicate for this show. The remainder of this special episode on this Memorial Day episode of the show is going to be dedicated to 2 former Louisville Cardinals that are trying to make their way in the NFL. Wide receivers Des Fitzpatrick and Tutu Atwell. We will start out with the former and why he is primed for a breakout season in the Music City. We'll talk about that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day that is available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. So last season, Dez Fitzpatrick, not necessarily a big role, played a little bit more as the season went on, recorded 5 catches for 49 yards and a touchdown in his 8 targets for the Tennessee Titans last year. But he is primed for a breakout season. Ryan Tannehill in OTAs had a couple things to say about Dez Fitzpatrick. I'm going to read some of those things off. This came from an article written by Jim Wyatt, senior writer and editor for TennesseeTitans.com. Let's see. This is from Ryan Tannehill. Dez is working. He came down to Florida and threw with me for a few days. We got some good work down there. I'm excited to see the progress he has made. He made a tough catch Tuesday coming across the middle, safety on his back through contact. It was just great play strength to finish the play and to make the catch across the middle. As a quarterback, you trust the guy, tight window, defender on their back. You make the throw, and he makes the play for you. That gives you a lot of confidence to be able to come back and throw into tight windows and make plays. Now it's all about consistency, just coming out on a daily basis and doing that. Some quotes from Titans general manager John Robinson in the same article written by Mr. White. I think Dez really grew as a player when he talked about the offseason. I think he has developed his skill set and he understands what the pro game takes now. He did not understand that last August, but he has grown, and I'm just really proud of the steps that he is taking. Fitzpatrick, in that same article, mentioned that it was a little bit of an adjustment heading into his professional career. He didn't necessarily know what to expect, but this time, a year around, he feels a lot better about where he's at. In not only mentioning that, but the depth chart is all but certain in the Music City in Nashville. Tennessee's wide receiving core looks a lot different than it did just a season ago. A.J. Brown was traded on draft night. Julio Jones was not re-signed. They traded for Robert Woods, so you get sort of a direct replacement for A.J. Brown. They drafted Treylon Burks with their first-round pick out of Arkansas, so, tall receiver out of the Razorback program is probably going to be the hopeful eventual replacement of Julio Jones. You have Nick Westbrook, Ekine, I think it's pronounced, but you also have Kyle Phillips, Racy McMath, Cody Hollister, Mason Kinsey, and Josh Malone kind of filling out the wide receiving committee. Dez Fitzpatrick likely will start the season for the Tennessee Titans as a backup. However, I do like the fact that the depth chart is kind of wide open. Robert Woods, yes, he has been very, very consistent, but he is coming off of a season-ending injury. He ran routes and caught some passes at OTAs on Tuesday, which was last week. So one would assume that he's going to be ready and available for the start of the season. But regardless, it is a running-dominated offense. The offense is predicated a lot on the touches that they give Derrick Henry. So I'm interested to see where the targets divvy up there. But there's a couple different lines of thought that I want to address when we talk about what to expect from Dez Fitzpatrick next year. Now, obviously, I think he's going to receive a major uptick in targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns, all across the board. So when I say he's primed for a breakout season, what am I speaking about there? What is a breakout season? Well, I think you have to take things into context when you talk about the depth chart, the overall offense that Tennessee runs, and that's one of the most run-dominant offenses in the NFL. So a lot of it is going to be designed for Derrick Henry. But when you look outside of that, it seems like Derrick Henry had an injury last season. So you have to worry maybe a little bit about sustainability. I'm not saying that he's an injury-prone player because he's not, but with him a year older, with, a lot of wear and tear on his body, I'm wondering if they try not to force-feed Derrick Henry as much as they do on a year-out, year-in basis, considering that the fact that he got hurt and missed significant time last season. Does that change how Mike Vrabel, runs things on offense? That's yet to be seen, but there's a lot of opportunity in terms of targets in that offense because, yes, Robert Woods is going to get a ton of targets. But outside of that, Treylon Burks has not played an NFL snap. Although I do think Treylon Burks is going to be one hell of an NFL player. Like, I am very, very high on Treylon Burks. He was, my number 2 best receiver in terms of my scouting, which I'm not an NFL draft scout by any means, but that's kind of where I had him pinned as, and that kind of reveals my individual thoughts on how well I think Treylon Burks is going to do in the league, because I thought he was very, very good at Arkansas. I think he did really, really well against top competition in the SEC, especially against a defense in Alabama. Treylon Burks is going to be very, very solid. But outside of those two, let's say that Treylon Burks is exactly what you thought of and lived up to the hype. There has to be more than 2 receivers. Yes, maybe you don't have the deep ball threat of A.J. Brown or the home run threat of A.J. Brown, but Julio Jones wasn't necessarily a guy that was relied upon in the Tennessee organization in terms of the wide receiving core. Spent a lot of time hurt, and then when he did play, didn't have a lot of great performances, and that's no disrespect to him. I think that Julio Jones is just in an offense that maybe not necessarily he's used to, but when I look at this wide receiving core top to bottom, I look at it and I think that why can't Des Fitzpatrick have a breakout season? Nick Westbrook, Ikhine, I can't even begin to pronounce that. Racey McMath, the old LSU national championship wide receiver, and some other guys that haven't necessarily created themselves anything in the league just yet. I look at it and I'm thinking, this is a situation where I think Des Fitzpatrick could be second or third on this team in terms of receiving yards by the end of the season. I think that we're going to see him, all that work he's put in the offseason. There's been video clips from Titans reporters and other national media that has shown Fitzpatrick making some good plays at OTA. He's got that solid speed for his 6'2 frame. Doesn't do one thing great, but does a lot of things extremely well. I remember former Louisville wide receiver coach Gunter Brewer just telling me in a Cardinal Sports Zone exclusive interview that there's not one aspect of being a wide receiver that Des Fitzpatrick is lacking in, and I think that you're starting to see that. Just an overall solid wide receiver. Robert Woods being more of a speed guy, Treylon Burks more of an aerial threat. I think Des Fitzpatrick, you might be able to slide into the slot or even be able to play outside. Very versatile, can play either one. So that's where I'm kind of looking at, and I'm making the statement that I think it's going to be a breakout year. Number one, you have to consider the fact that the Tennessee Titans don't necessarily pass the ball as much as other teams. They're a run-dominated offense. Derrick Henry is going to get a lot of his touches. I get that. Ryan Tannehill is not the greatest quarterback in the ACC, but at least AFC, but at least he's serviceable. I think that this is an instance to where we are going to see Des Fitzpatrick exponentially raise his targets, his receptions, his yards, his touchdowns. He's going to be a player that you're probably going to be week 2, week 3 looking at in terms of the fantasy football waiver wire thinking, okay, am I going to have the opportunity to get Des Fitzpatrick in free agency? That is going to be something that if you're looking into, you're a 12-team league, a deeper PPR league, in the later rounds, I'm telling you, Des Fitzpatrick is going to make a breakout season. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. But in terms of breakouts, obviously it's context-based, but Tutu Atwell, according to Sean McVay, has all the ability to be the guy for the Los Angeles Rams in the future. We will talk about that here in just a second. Obviously, if you are watching this on YouTube, you are not going to hear the implemented advertisements that get added by the audio services. But if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all of the streaming services, you're going to hear those. So stay tuned. But heading into the final segment, as always, thank you all for making us your first listen every day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. Tutu Atwell, unfortunately, no receptions last year, no targets, no yards, no touchdowns, considering he suffered a season-ending shoulder injury before the season. So not necessarily able to continue his development. Got a minor setback, but according to Sean McVay, if you are one of those Rams fans or former Louisville fans or an NFL fan that has given up on Tutu Atwell, you just might want to pump the brakes. In a Rams Digest fan network post from Sports Illustrated, Connor Zimmerly put in some quotes from Rams head coach Sean McVay talking about his confidence in Tutu Atwell heading into year 2. I want to read some of those quotes. Let's see. He goes on to say, and I quote, "When you look at it, Tutu Atwell's a guy that got injured. I think he's looked really good this offseason program up to this point." He goes on to say, "I still believe that Tutu can be that guy. By no means is the book written on Tutu Atwell. He had the shoulder injury. He's looked really good. He's done a great job of responding the right way." So, and if there's any single head coach in the National Football League that can maximize the skill set of the former Louisville Football wide receiver star, it is the Rams head coach, Sean McVay. Looking at the offense for the Rams, although there are some changes, the same challenges present themselves for Tutu Atwell in terms of finding the field. I think you're going to see him maybe take place in some special teams, maybe as a kick returner, a punt returner, have some opportunities like Van Jefferson got, like Robert Woods got, in instances to where he gets some end arounds, to where he's trying to catch the defense off guard. But it's a crowded wide receiver core. Although they lost Odell Beckham Jr., although they lost Robert Woods from a season ago, they brought in Allen Robinson in free agency. Cooper Kupp, who is putting up seasons like no other, is still there. You have Van Jefferson, who is a very, very solid third wide receiving option. After that, Brandon Powell has been a guy who's made some noise. Ben Skowronek, Landon Akers, moving on, so on and so forth. It is a crowded wide receiving committee for the Los Angeles Rams. So it's a lot different of a situation for Tutu than it is Des Fitzpatrick, because with the the Rams offense, it's a little bit more crowded than the Titans, but the Titans run the ball a little bit more than the Rams, so it might even out a little bit more, although you are having to give touches to Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson Jr., and even Kyron Williams, who's going to be the third string back out of Notre Dame. I do think that there is a role this season for Tutu Atwell. He's looked good in the offseason. He's one of those guys that it's just like, that Sean McVay does a great job of creating certain packages for certain guys. I mean, we saw that with Brandon Cooks when he was a Ram. We saw that with Robert Woods when he was a Ram. Cooper Kupp has his design packages. Allen Robinson is going to reap the benefits of being in a Sean McVay offense. Van Jefferson as well. So I don't think that Tutu is going to be a starter. I think he's going to be one of those situational guys that gets thrown into packages to where he's maybe taking end arounds, wide receiver screens, just instances like deep ball threats, so on and so forth. I'm extremely encouraged by the creativity of Sean McVay, just because he's a guy that thinks outside of the box. He has the quarterback finally that kind of fits what he's looking to do. No disrespect to Jared Goff, but it's obvious that when you did get a quarterback in with the caliber that Sean McVay can run in his offense, like Matthew Stafford, and they went on to win a Super Bowl. Defensively, obviously, is big for the Rams as well, but offensively, make no mistake about it, the Los Angeles Rams are no slouch. Sean McVay, very, very good on that side of the ball. I'm just the biggest keys here for Tutu in year 2, obviously, are health. Can he stay healthy? And in turn, how healthy can the Rams offense stay? Allen Robinson sometimes we'll see how he does after some disappointing seasons in Chicago. I think that he's going to have a big bounce back season. Cooper Kupp is going to obviously get his touches. Van Jefferson is a deep ball threat. I could definitely see Tutu Atwell, being the 4th most targeted receiver in that offense. And then again, you have to mention the fact that Matthew Stafford is a quarterback that likes to target his running backs coming out of the backfield as well. So ultimately, just super excited for Tutu, excited for Dez. I think that this is a situation where both of those guys are going to have some solid bounce back seasons in year 2. More so for Dez, however, I think that Tutu has his work cut out for him in terms of getting into the rotation, in terms of reps, in terms of targets, and he's going to be a player that might have 2 or 3 targets a game, but also turn that into 80, 90, 100 yards. Kind of like a early on days of Robbie Anderson, to where or like a Jamison Crowder, or trying to think of some other guys that didn't get a lot of targets, but when they did, big things usually happen. So I could definitely see Tutu Atwell kind of priming himself for a big year in his third and fourth seasons, more so than in year one coming off of his injury, considering the fact that the Rams offense is just so stacked in the wide receiving core. So this is the second episode on this Memorial Day edition of the show. There will be another one, so be on the lookout for that, talking about the stars of the season in the Louisville athletic calendar. Before we get out of here, I want to give a shout out to the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast hosted by Raphael Barlow, Leif Thulin, Sam Ferris, Richard Stamen gives you an in-depth look into the biggest prospects, the latest player rankings, and of course big boards. You can get that on the Odyssey app or wherever you like to get your podcasts, YouTube, etc. Also want to extend a thank you to all of the veterans with us and unfortunately not with us on this Memorial Day. We remember those that lost their lives sacrificing for this country. We send our thoughts to their loved ones on this day and how tough this could be for them. We salute all of the veterans out there worldwide that are consistently sacrificing for this nation and putting their lives in danger for the safety of others. So we salute you all for sure. That's going to wrap up this special issue or special edition of the show. We will see you right back here very, very soon.